So the Eibach Pro Truck Sport rear shock is made for stock to 1-inch lifted 04 to 08 F150s, and this is going to be probably the best upgraded shock available for under the $100 mark. Eibach is obviously a name that you've probably heard. They are kind of the gold standard in the world of shocks and struts and overall suspension components and off-road damping, and it's safe to say that this will provide a huge upgrade over those factory shocks, especially if those shocks are busted or leaking or overall they're not doing their job anymore. Now, Eibach is obviously a name you've probably heard before, especially if you've shopped around for suspension components and you've looked for upgrades for your truck, and it's safe to say that the Pro Truck Sport is no exception. This is a physically bigger shock. It has bigger rods and pistons on it, has a nice zinc coating on it, so it's safe to say that this is built to go off-road and handle a lot more suspension travel than your factory setup. And on the note of that factory setup, these actually cost about the same as stock replacements from Ford, so it's safe to say if your shocks are busted or leaking, you might as well go with a good upgrade like this one. This does install quite easily. I would actually give this a very simple 1 out of 3 wrenches on my difficulty meter. You're simply removing 2 bolts and nuts, one at the top and one at the bottom of the factory shock, and you're reusing them when you install the new one. So there's no custom hardware that you have to install besides the shock itself. So again, if you want a good upgrade, you take your truck off-road and you want to get some better suspension travel and overall control when you do go off-road, go ahead and take a look at the Eibach. And without further ado, I'm actually going to show you how to get this installed. To install your new shocks, you'll need the following tools: standard drive ratchet, a 15mm socket, and an 18mm wrench. An optional tool includes a cordless impact. So removing your stock shock is pretty straightforward. For that, you're going to need that 15mm socket and that 18mm wrench. Now, you can do this on the ground with your suspension under load. You won't have any issues removing the shock that way, but since we do have our truck up in the air, we are supporting our rear axle with a pole jack just to take a little bit of pressure off the shock. So now we have our factory shock removed. You guys can really see the big differences here between the original old and busted and our new one here. Clearly this nice zinc coated polished finish obviously stands out, and if you were curious, you could see that the new shock is physically larger than the factory shock. Obviously it has improved damping, it has stronger pistons and rods inside, and that's where you get that added capability off-road. It's safe to say that this thing will be able to take a lot more travel, a lot more abuse than the factory shock. Won't have to worry about this thing busting out or leaking out and thus losing all that damping. Now, throwing this shock on is the same exact process as the factory shock. You're going to reuse those factory bolts and nuts, and I'm also happy to say on a side note here, the mounting locations on the new shock do use rubber bushings like the factory shock, so you're not going to get any added noise, vibration, or harshness when you do take this off-road. Now, installing the Eibach shock is, as you would imagine, the same exact process as the factory shock. So we're actually going to reuse those nuts and bolts. So let's go ahead and throw our new one on, shall we? So once you got one shock bolted up, you're going to do the same thing for the other side, and that'll wrap up our very easy install. That also wraps up my review of the Eibach Pro Truck Sport rear shock fitting your 04 to 08 factory to 1-inch lifted F150. I'm Travis. Thanks for watching. For all things F150, keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.